Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. Today we'll be covering how to install Jenkins with a reverse proxy. We'll also use Let's Encrypt to create a SSL certificate. We'll then go on and install a agent. This will be an SSH based agent which will install Docker, and then we'll run through a sample Jenkins file just to show you how it all ties back together. For those of you that are new to my channel, my name is Dinesh. I talk about all things DevOps, so if you're interested in these types of topics, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And at the end of this video, if you like what you've seen, please consider giving this a like to help the YouTube algorithm. Without further ado, let's get started. So everything has been documented on my documentation site, which I will link in the video description below. So you can follow along and copy and paste and use the commands that I'm actually using. So the first thing that we'll need is a couple of virtual machines. There's a prerequisite. So in my example, I'm going to be using an Ubuntu 22.04 virtual machine. This should work on other flavors of Linux as well. Of course, you'll have to use the appropriate packet manager. We'll walk through the installation. We're going to use a custom version of Java. So we'll use Adoption's Tamarin Java 11. Again, this is a personal preference. If you have a specific version of Java that you would like to use, certainly feel free to do so. Once we install Java, we'll go ahead and install Jenkins, and then we'll go through the configuration and setting up the agent. So let's just go ahead and run through these installation steps. The first thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we've updated our package repository as well as the packages. So we can do that. And we can see that everything has been updated. And I should point out here, I've got two terminals that have been opened. One on the left-hand side is for the Jenkins controller. The one on the right-hand side is where we'll be installing the Jenkins agent. So for now, we'll just be working on this left-hand terminal. Now that we've updated our packages, let's go ahead and install Java 11. So to do this, we want to become root and then add the repository. So let's copy this block of code here, become root, and we can simply paste this. If we head back to the documentation, we can see that we next need to update our repository and then install the Tamarin 11 JDK. So let's copy these commands and install JDK. Now you do have the ability to have multiple flavors of Java installed on your machine, and if you happen to do so, there's a command here in Ubuntu that allows you to set a specific version. So we'll see in my case, I've only got one version installed, but if you have multiple versions, you'll be able to set the specific version of Java that you would like to install. So let's copy this. And as soon as this finishes, we can go ahead and execute that command. So we can see here that there's only one alternative on this particular machine. In your case, you may have multiple versions, and you can go ahead and select the appropriate version of Java. The next thing we'll want to do is we'll want to make sure that we've got the right version of Java installed. We can do that by checking the Java version. And we can see here, indeed, we have the OpenJDK 11 Tamarin version. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to install Jenkins itself. We're going to install Jenkins from the Jenkins repository. So let's add the repository to the system. Once we've done that, we'll want to make sure that we add the repository. And the next thing we'll do is we'll update those packages before finally installing Jenkins. So this will just take a couple of seconds to go through and install. It all depends on the speed of your internet connection as well as the resources that you've allocated to your virtual machine. In my case, I've added 4 CPUs with 8 gigabytes of memory and 32 gigabytes of disk storage, as this is just a tutorial. Now once Jenkins has been installed, we'll want to go ahead and start the service. So this will just take another couple of seconds here. So now that Jenkins has been installed, let's go ahead and start it up. And we can actually monitor the status of Jenkins by taking a look at this status. So let's take a look at the status of Jenkins, and we can see here that it is active and that it is running. Now, by default, Jenkins will install and run on port 8080. So in order to access your version of Jenkins that's been installed, you'll need to open up a browser and visit port 8080. So in this case, we'll go to my IP address, which is .10 on port 8080. And we can see here that Jenkins has now been installed. By default, the initial password is stored in a file on the host machine itself. So what we'll want to do is we'll want to copy this path and cat that file so we have the initial password. So here we can see by pasting in this password, we're able to continue, and we'll just go ahead and install the suggested plugins. This will install a set of good base plugins that most projects or pipelines will rely on. So once this finishes, we'll go ahead and move on to the next step, which will be to configure Jenkins. In our case, that'll be to install Nginx and set up a reverse proxy before moving on to setting up the TLS certificate. Okay, we can see the plugins have been installed, and we're now presented with a page for us to create our initial user. So let's go ahead and create a admin user and set a password. And then we can save and continue. Oops, it requires a email address, so let's give it a email address. Again, this can be any email address that you choose. And once we do that, we'll need to verify what the Jenkins URL is. We'll have to come back and change this once we install our reverse proxy and set up our certificate. But for now, this is the correct Jenkins URL. So let's save and finish. And then we can now access the user interface. So we can see here that Jenkins has now been installed. We do see an error message here saying that there is no additional agents or nodes that have been configured, and it's a security risk to run your pipelines on the Agile controller itself, but we'll take care of that here in a little bit. So for now, let's head back to the documentation and take a look at how to install the Nginx reverse proxy. So in order for this, we must install the Nginx package. So let's go ahead and copy this. We can head back to our terminal and install Nginx. Once Nginx has been installed, we can verify its status. And we can see that it is now running. And we should now also be able to visit the IP address on port 80 to see if Nginx is actually running. So as we mentioned before, my IP address is .10. You'll have to change that with the IP address of your virtual machine. So here we can see we've now got a welcome to Nginx. So now that Nginx has been configured, we'll need to actually create a Jenkins specific configuration block. So in order to do that, we'll want to create a configuration file. So let's go ahead and create a specific block. So we can do this by copying and pasting this command. And I've already provided you with a sample block here. You may need to adjust this to meet your requirements, but for most cases, you should just be able to take this as is. Of course, remember that you'll need to change your server name. It's important that the server name matches the server name that you would like to use. And then also, I should have mentioned this earlier, but you'll need to pick the domain name or the server name when you create this file. So let's copy this block. Let's paste that in here and save that. And then what we'll want to do is we'll want to link this to make it available to Nginx. In order to do that, you simply create a symbolic link And to do that, we can copy and paste this command. And then we'll test our configuration to make sure that we didn't make any mistakes within our configuration itself. And we can see that everything is okay. The syntax is great. So the final thing that's left to do is to go ahead and restart Nginx. Great. Now that Nginx has been restarted, we should be able to head back over and refresh this page. And for some reason here, it looks like it is not running out because let's take a look. Why is this not running? We can see that Nginx has started. Let's head back here again. Make sure this is not a caching issue. And open up the browser again. Nope. So it is still running on port 8080. Okay. So maybe let's try and stop Nginx. Let's start it and see if that helps. Nope. Okay, so so now that Nginx has been restarted, let's head back to our browser. And remember, we need to change this from the IP address to the domain name that we have configured. So part of the prerequisite is that you have a DNS entry set up and is pointing to the IP address of this virtual machine. In our case, we used jenkins.dev.dman.cloud, and we can see that we now have Jenkins running on our custom domain, and we're presented with a login. So let's go ahead and log in just to make sure things are working as expected. Oops. And that's because it's redirecting us to a secure version. So let's go ahead and fix that by installing a TLS certificate. So if we head back to the documentation, I have a section here that explains how to configure Jenkins with TLS. So the first thing that we'll need to do is we'll need to install certbot. We're going to be using certbot with Let's Encrypt to automatically keep our TLS certificate updated. So let's go ahead and install certbot. Once certbot has been installed, we will want to verify that the configuration is set up as expected with our domain name. We just set this up so we know that this is correct, but if you've taken a break and coming back to this at a later date, you may want to go back and just make sure that your configuration blocks match. The next thing that we'll want to do is we'll want to go ahead and tell certbot to create a certificate for our domain. So let's copy this and execute the command. And we're going to be presented with some questions. So the first thing that it needs is our email address. So let's provide it with our email address. And then it asks us to accept the terms of services. If we're willing to participate and share our email address, so we'll say no here. And then certbot will go ahead and do its thing. It's going to go ahead and request a certificate. And if everything is okay, it'll come back and install that into our Nginx configuration. So here we can see that the certificate was successfully deployed. If we go back over to the documentation, we also want to make sure that our certbot is capable of renewing this when the expiration time comes for that certificate. So we can do this by executing a dry run. So let's copy this command, and this will simulate a renewal of that certificate. So we can see here that it's going through its process. It'll take just a few seconds for it to validate that it's able to, and we can see that everything was successful and all the simulated renewals did indeed succeed. So if we head back to our Jenkins, and this time if we refresh, we can see that we're now going to access Jenkins on our custom domain using the HTTPS protocol. So now when we refresh the page, we can see that we are now able to log into our secure version of Jenkins. Oops, if we type in the right password. Great. So the next thing that we'll do is we'll set up an agent for Jenkins to execute its pipeline jobs on. So before we set up our agent, there is actually one setting that we forgot to change. So earlier when we installed Jenkins, we told its configuration that the URL was going to be that IP address, but we have now installed a custom domain with a certificate, so we need to update that within Jenkins. So to do that, let's head into Manage Jenkins, and we can see we're already getting that error message that there appears to be a problem with the reverse proxy. So to fix this, we need to head into Configure System and change the Jenkins URL. So we need to replace this with the updated URL, which is https:// and in my case it's jenkins.dev.tman.cloud. We can hit save. And then now if we go back into Manage Jenkins, we'll see that that has been taken care of. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, let's go ahead and add our SSH-based agent. So head back to the documentation and head into the adding an SSH-based agent with Docker and Jenkins. So in this tutorial, I'm going to actually skip the Docker part, and we're just going to go ahead and configure the agent. In future videos, I will talk about how to set up Docker to be able to be used by the pipelines. But this video is getting a little bit long, so let's just go ahead and set up the SSH-based agent itself. So we'll need a secondary virtual machine where the agent will run. In this case, it's going to also be a Ubuntu 22.04 machine. We'll need to create a Jenkins user, which is what the controller will talk to the agent server as and run its pipelines. So let's go ahead and set this up. So this time we're going to be working on our second machine, which is the terminal on the right hand side. So let's go ahead and add a Jenkins user. We'll give it a password. And we'll call this Jenkins agent and accept the defaults for everything else. Next, we want to make sure that we grant sudo rights to the Jenkins user. So let's do this. And now Jenkins has been added to the sudoers list. We'll also go ahead and skip this part about installing Java. This will be covered in more detail when we talk about pipelines. So we'll skip the installation of Java and Docker for now. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to connect to the remote SSH agent. So from the controller, let's SSH as that new user that we created into the agent host. So from this machine, we want to become Jenkins on this side, and then we want to SSH as user Jenkins to the agent machine. And in our case, that is running on this .11. So great, we are now signed in to that agent machine. And what this does is it sets up, and I'll actually just show you here. So if we go into the .ss, if I exit back out and then look at the .ssh folder, we can see that it's now created a known host. So this just avoids prompts when the agent tries to communicate to the agent from the user interface. So let's go ahead and SSH back into the agent from this node. And then we'll need to set up some key pairs. So in order to do that, we can execute this command. And this will create a key pair using RSA. And we'll output that into two files called Jenkins agent. We're not going to use any passphrases, and we can see that those have now been created. We can then change the permission for additional security, so we can change the permission of these files to 600. So now that we just have read-write access for the Jenkins user. Okay, so now the next thing that we want to do is we want to add the public SSH key to the list of authorized keys on that agent machine. So in order to do that, we need to take a copy of the public key and cat it into a file called authorized keys. So let's copy this. Perfect. So now that we've done that, we'll now want to configure our controller to be able to use this new agent. So it'll talk to, the controller will talk to the agent using SSH. So let's take a copy of this private key. So let's cat that private key. We'll copy it to our clipboard. And then we can go back into our Jenkins dashboard and add the new node. So if we head into Manage Nodes and Clouds, add a new node. Let's give it a name. So in this case, we'll just use agent node. We'll make this a permanent agent and hit create node. So here we need to specify how many number of executors, so how many jobs can be run in parallel. So we'll just set this to 2. This can be adjusted to meet your needs. The remote directory is the home directory of the Jenkins user. So in our case, that is home Jenkins. We're not going to apply any labels. We're going to use this node as much as possible. And under launch method, we're going to change this to launch agents via SSH. And then here we'll need to provide the IP address of the agent. In our case, it is .11. And then we'll need to specify some credentials. So in order to specify credentials, if you don't have your SSH key already configured, which if this is a fresh install, you'll just see none here. You can simply click on Add, select Jenkins, and then for kind, we'll change that to SSH username with private key. We'll give this a name. So since we've already used Jenkins, I'm just going to call this Jenkins agent. We'll take the description name as the same and call it Jenkins agent. The username, however, is still Jenkins. Whoops. And then we need to enter that private key that we just copied. So let's paste that directly in here. We didn't specify any passphrases when we set up that key, so we could just simply click on Add, and then we can save this. Now if we go into the agent node, we can launch the agent, and we can see, okay, so it looks like there is some error here. Let's go back and take a look at what we may not have configured. So if we go back into our agent machine here, let's take a look. And we do have that authorized keys that's been set up as we expected. So let's see what else could be going wrong. Let's take a look at this error message. The process has been aborted. Let me just make sure that we've got the right key specified. So if we go back in here, so by default, even though we created that key, it never actually, or rather I forgot to select it. So let's go ahead and select that agent password, hit save. And then now if we go into nodes, we can see that this agent has now been configured. And we can take a look at the log and we can see that the agent is now successfully connected and online. So as a final step, let's just quickly make sure that we can actually execute pipelines on this machine. So we'll keep this quick and then we'll get into more specific details with configuring pipelines in future videos. So for now, let's just go ahead and create a job. We'll call this Jenkins agent test. We'll use a pipeline for this job and let's click on OK. Now we're going to keep this very simple, so we're not going to do any specific settings. What we're going to do is we're actually just going to create a simple echo of a hello world. So if we go back to the documentation and we look at our initial installing Jenkins file, I actually included a sample pipeline here. So again, we're not going to get into pipelines in this video. So for now, let's just go ahead and copy this block. Let's head back in here. Let's paste that. And you'll see the one thing I'll point out is that we have agent as any here. So let's apply that pipeline and hit save. Now we want to ensure that this pipeline runs on that agent that we set up. So let's make sure that there are no other agents configured. So if we go to Manage Jenkins, Manage Nodes and Cloud, you can see that our built-in node is actually still active here. So let's go into the built-in node, we'll configure it, and we'll change this to 0. That means that no jobs would run on the controller itself. So now that we hit save, we can go back into our dashboard. We can go into our agent test pipeline and let's hit build now. And we can see that it is now starting up. So if we click in here and take a look at the console output, we can see that it was started by admin and it is actually running on the agent node. And we have indeed successfully been able to execute our first pipeline. So that was an introduction into installing Jenkins, setting it up behind a reverse proxy, enabling security by installing a TLS or SSL certificate. We also configured an agent using SSH, and we executed a test job. Now, if you found this useful or you like videos like this, please consider subscribing to my channel. I'll be doing a lot more videos getting into pipelines, complete DevOps pipelines, and end-to-end testing in future videos. So please like, subscribe, and share this video if you found it helpful. Thank you very much.